Welcome to episode 66 of the GT on 5G. It's the latest inside scoop on everything 5G. We try to cover 6 topics in about 15 minutes, not always successful, but it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend. Joining me again this week is my fellow analyst, Anshel. And once again, we welcome Diana from Fierce Wireless. So let's get started. Hey, welcome. My first topic this week is an announcement between AT&T and OneWeb. They're going to partner up to extend reach into remote areas. And so the press release spoke to areas that are lacking in fiber and obviously areas that are lacking in, traditional cell tower support. And so my thought is, could this be successful? And certainly OneWeb's had its challenges, and we've talked about OneWeb on prior podcasts. They've gone through bankruptcy reorganization. Hughes invested in them. They've had some additional investments in them as well. But this is a real big win for OneWeb, in my perspective, really legitimizes what they're doing. I did some research, and it appears that to date, they've launched 288 low Earth orbit satellites. They expect that number to rise to almost 650. And they expect global coverage by the end of 2022. So they're well on their way to establish their footprint. And certainly, I've talked about bridging the digital divide, and you're not going to have fiber in these outermost parts of rural America and rural parts of the world as well. So I think this is a great partnership, and it really speaks to the viability of LEO to be a key part of bridging the digital divide. So Diana, I'm wondering, do you have any insights here?
Yeah, so I actually talked to AT&T about this week, and so there are a couple points to hit. So to your point about this being a really big win for OneWeb, it is. To date, they've kind of had a handful of distribution agreements and MOUs with, a couple Canadian operators. I think there was one government in there, as well as a couple others. From what I understand from AT&T, this is going to be focused on providing service to their enterprise and business customers. This isn't a residential broadband service in the way that some people are looking at satellite for residential. And this is also something they might use for remote cell site backhaul. And also, from what I understand from chatting with them, AT&T is going to be the one that has the relationship with the customers. So the customers are just going to buy services and they'll get them through AT&T, and that's the name they'll see on the bill. They're not going to necessarily know that OneWeb is the one that's providing them. Of course, everything is still early. They said at this time they're not looking at it for residential, but they kind of left open the door that maybe that's a route they could explore in future. They're not right now, to be clear, but it'll be interesting to see if that evolves over time.
Yeah, I think it could. But great insight. Wow, I guess I picked the right topic to lead off with. But let's move to your first topic this week. And you want to talk about Dish and some 5G delays. I was actually at the big 5G event in person in Denver last week. Dish did take the stage, and I was quite impressed with what they discussed around leveraging their MVNO acquisitions to have almost 1 million subscribers at launch. But there have been some delays, and you want to talk about that.
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of just, it was something that one of our contributors, Sue Merrick, raised in a column for Fierce Wireless this week. And so I just kind of wanted to touch on it because, everybody's been talking about Dish, but Dish also has some downsides. They were originally hoping, I think, to do a commercial launch in Q4 of this year, but that has now kind of been, pushed back to 2022. And that's not exactly confidence inspiring, especially given Dish's, track record with some other things like the IoT network that they decided to scrap. But it's interesting also that they were trying to reassure that, they are committed to building this 5G. They're committed to doing it right, even if it is a little bit behind schedule. And that even though there are you have to work through some of the newness around Open RAN and kind of threading that network together. They are still committed to doing it. And one of the things that I've kind of been watching in my spare time is what Dish is posting on LinkedIn. They kind of or they post, and what you see is there are little bits of construction that they are hinting at. So some of the places we've seen, obviously Las Vegas is where they're planning to do their launch. I've also spotted some likes and or interesting tidbits around Richmond, Orlando, DC, Houston. They're hiring for construction and site development stuff over in Indianapolis and Minneapolis. So I think it'll be interesting to watch those. I'm trying to keep track of those as they go along, because you always want to play the guessing game of where they'll launch first. But I don't know if you guys have anything to add in terms of Dish and delays. Anshel, maybe you have something?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It doesn't really inspire much confidence, when they push back the launch of a network, and it also doesn't help that they are inking some MVNO deals. So it doesn't really inspire much confidence in their own network, and it's really we've seen a lot of deals that are going down that inspire that they're going to do something, but we don't know necessarily whether it'll be when they say it'll be, or if it'll happen at another delayed date. And like you said, the number of subscribers is also going to be questionable, because they're not really going for any enormous markets quite yet. It looks like they're going for some mid-tier or lower. So I'm not sure how many subscribers they'll be able to get, but the one thing I think we should be looking at is when they start ramping their marketing activities, because I think that'll really tell us when they think they're ready to launch, because they won't want to waste those marketing dollars unless they're going to benefit from them.
I'll just add something there. It's interesting. When I was in Denver last week, I know that AT&T has not deployed its 5G footprint in Denver, and isn't Dish based in Colorado? So I mean, why wouldn't they pick a market in Colorado like Denver to launch its network? I don't know. People with bigger paychecks probably make those decisions, but.
The only other tidbit I would add is I don't remember the date off the top of my head. It might be June. They have set coverage targets they have to hit. So it's interesting to watch the delays up against those targets.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
Cool. So then I'll work on my first topic, which is the NFL and Verizon have signed another 10-year deal. This is actually an extension of a 10-year deal they had 10 years ago. So they're extending it for another 10 years. And this deal is obviously a very big partnership. The NFL has already installed, with Verizon's help, 25 different stadiums with 5G millimeter wave. And this is going to be an extension of that partnership and a continuation, really leveraging 5G and millimeter wave as the core of it. And they're going to, start adding things like 5G multi-view, which allows for 7 simultaneous camera streams, as well as augmented reality overlays of NFL next gen stats on 5G enabled phones. So there are going to be some added user experience improvements to the NFL fan experience that sounds like it's going to be only in the stadium, and it's only going to be possible by millimeter wave. And the stadium is a perfect example, of millimeter wave being, a great application, because you have so many users in the same place, and you basically have a coverage hole in most scenarios, because these stadiums are made of concrete and rebar, and these DASs can't handle it unless they're millimeter wave. So this is a really good partnership. I think it's a good spend for Verizon to get more visibility, especially as people start going back to NFL games and filling up stadiums. But overall, it's going to cost a rumored $1 billion, which is about $100 million a year. But for Verizon, they're going to need to continue to market their 5G network, and sports is a great application for that. And honestly, from my experience, millimeter wave in stadiums is far and beyond better than anything else. Obviously, mid-band would be great to have, but millimeter wave has the best capacity. So I think this is a win for Verizon and the NFL, and potentially even people who are attending games in person, because I personally don't actually enjoy watching a lot of NFL games in person anymore, just because I feel like a lot of stadiums don't really have that great of an experience. So I think this is a great way to elevate the experience and make going in person again more fun and different from what it was pre the pandemic, and also kind of justify some of these stratospheric ticket prices that we're seeing in some of these new stadiums.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add something to that. So at the big 5G event, I met with JMA Wireless. They've been partnered with the NFL, and it's not really been around the fan experience. It's been back office in communications. And in particular, I discussed with one of their executives there on site what JMA is doing to enable some private LTE and 5G deployment for communication. So communication from press box down to the coaching staff, and in between the coaching staff and players that are headphone and mic'd up. And I asked them, it's like, wow, audio, I would think video, right? With 5G, with lower latency and faster throughput, but these audio channels are digital and they're multi-channel. And so, and there's typically a lot of contention, like you mentioned, Anshel, with the DAS systems in these stadiums. And so they actually, it's publicly disclosed, but they supported the communications infrastructure for the, I believe it was the Hall of Fame game. And so I think you're going to see, a lot of applications with 5G within sporting arenas that are not necessarily, fan facing. They're going to be, sort of back office as well. So, and Diane, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Not too much. I mean, I'm not really surprised by this deal because obviously, a lot of the operators have been really gung-ho on these sorts of experiences as they're trying to find ways to market 5G. It's been around the fan experience. They've had all these demos at these stadiums, pretty much everywhere you go. And it's been about the fan experience in stadium, stuff like gaming. And I really think this is where it's a good venue to try to reach consumers and convey that message. And so I'm not surprised that they would spring for a deal like this.
Yeah, I agree. It's a way, I think, in the future to monetize things. But AT&T with the Dallas Cowboys, they have done a lot with 5G within AT&T Stadium, but that's not necessarily a monetization opportunity. It's just kind of improving the overall fan experience. And so, yeah, it's exciting to see it. Obviously millimeter wave and sporting venues. We've talked, Anshel and I have talked about that on prior podcasts. That's a killer use case. So, but let's move to my second topic this week, and I want to talk about Cisco. And recently, there was an announcement where Cisco, with a handful of companies in Austria, conducted a proof of concept for a remote piloted racing car. And on a prior podcast, Anshel and I covered the July announcement between T-Mobile and Halo, where Halo is operating in the Las Vegas market. T-Mobile has a very complete 5G deployment out there, low, mid, and higher band spectrum. And it's a similar situation. It's an electric car. It's remote piloted, and it's delivered to someone that wants to rent it on a fractional basis. But this is really cool. It kind of takes it to the next level. It's also an electric car, but it's a racing car that can speed up to 150, 170 miles an hour. And they actually conducted this proof of concept at a Red Bull racing track somewhere in Austria. And the pilot of the vehicle was almost 50 miles away from the vehicle and was able to navigate this successfully. And so, what Cisco is bringing to the table is it's basically 5G over SD-WAN. So with edge enablement, and it really, and I've talked about the power of bringing edge and 5G together. And so it's an exciting proof of concept. And I really think, as we see the Halo T-Mobile announcement and we see this proof of concept with Cisco, I mean, this could be a real deal. I mean, this could be taking the Uber and the Lyft and the ride sharing scenario to another level. And obviously, Uber has talked quite a bit about, autonomous, delivery of vehicles, but it's just the technology isn't quite there yet. So, Anshel, what do you think?
Well, I think it is interesting because, racing is one of those edge cases in terms of technology that make it very easy to understand whether there are limitations to the technology. And, I think there's a lot of interest in, in my mind, that you have FPV drones, you could have FPV cars, right?
Yeah.
So you could take the risk to the driver out of the equation. I believe that the track that they did this on was near Vienna, which used to be a Formula One racetrack. And there have been deaths at that track before. So the idea of eliminating the potential of a death at a track is something interesting. But obviously, there's a whole physical aspect to Formula One that makes it the sport that it is. But overall, I think it's just another example of how 5G low latency is ultimately going to be probably the biggest use case for 5G. Even though the speeds are great, the latency is going to be what really drives applications. I don't know. What do you think, Diana?
Not too much to add. You guys covered it pretty thoroughly, but the interesting part for me, I don't know how much you guys know. I've been kind of more immersed in the wireline and telecom side of things recently, and I thought the 5G over SD-WAN element was really interesting.
Yeah.
So I just kind of wanted to point to that and see if we're going to see more of that. I know that we had covered this, and one of the things was that the SD-WAN network, it was supporting the steering link, the video feeds, and the communication to the pit crew and all of that. It was really cool. So I just want to see if that's something we'll hear more about, because like you guys have said, we've been hearing a lot about the edge. You don't always hear SD-WAN thrown into that press release, though.
Right.
So I'm going to have my eye out for that for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's lots of convergence going on in networking, and security and all of that. And yeah, so it is interesting to see these different things and technologies and platforms coming together. But Diana, let's move to your next topic this week, and you want to talk about Ericsson and energy usage, right?
Yeah, so they recently put out a press release about some trials they were doing with Vodafone that kind of showed, more than a 40% reduction in the daily average energy use using their 32TR radio. And I think it was something like 43% during, peak hours and 55% during non-peak. But that's a huge deal, especially if you take it in context of what everybody's been saying about 5G is going to require so much more energy, not just because of the bandwidth demands, but also because of, like increasing number of small cells and all of that. So I thought that was, kind of worthwhile to note. And so what Vodafone said they're going to do is they're going to deploy 1,500 of those radios across their network. I think it was in the UK by April of next year. And I think it's notable that Vodafone is moving on this because that's another trend we've seen in the industry of operators talking about their carbon footprints and trying to reduce emissions. And I know Vodafone specifically is targeting 2027 to reach net zero emissions in the UK, which is probably why they're moving on those radios so quickly. And then 2040 for the rest of its global operations. So I just wanted to highlight that. It's kind of showing just progress on a trend that we've been seeing. And I don't know if you guys have heard any more about this. Anshel, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I actually did see this announcement, and I thought it was interesting. And I had a feeling a lot of people wouldn't cover it because it's just, it's a power thing. But for anybody who really tracks, service providers and operators, that power is one of their largest costs because these things are always on, right?
Yeah.
So I think having a 40% reduction in average energy use is huge. And to your point, they're probably going to be very aggressive with this because of that. And I think ultimately the idea that 5G has the potential to increase power consumption, I think it's a valid point. But at the same time, we also have to look at power consumption per bit, right? And that's significantly coming down with 5G. And if we can even lower that more, I think it's a net benefit for everybody. And overall, I just think that this equipment probably won't come cheaply because of the energy efficiency and the cost savings. but I think that it will potentially push the rest of the industry to continue to move in this direction towards improved energy efficiency. Simply because I think everyone wants us to be more efficient as a industry. And yeah, I think it's a very welcome, improvement by Ericsson.
Mhm. I would agree. I'll just add that today, actually, Cisco had an announcement around its net zero initiative as well. Diana, what you spoke to with Vodafone mirrors very closely to Cisco as well, as far as their goals and that sort of thing over the next, couple of decades and that sort of thing. So it's like, I think you're going to see more and more, not only, service providers and operators, but infrastructure providers really focus on this as well, for the betterment of the overall environment. So, but
Yeah, and
Anshel, why don't you, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, Diana.
I was just gonna say real quickly, I know that there was a ton of operators that signed on to, I think it was a GSMA pact to address energy efficiency by a certain date. I don't have it on hand, but yeah, so this is really something that's gonna be picking up, I would expect. But yeah, sorry, Anshel, go ahead with your last topic.
Yeah, I think the last topic for me is going to be about there's a conference that just wrapped up in Munich, which is IIA 21. And this is kind of like the mobility conference for the automotive industry. And at that conference, one of the big attendees there was Qualcomm. And their new CEO, Cristiano Amon, kind of talked about the importance of 5G and enabling a lot of these new automotive use cases, because right now in the automotive industry, the big topics are autonomy and being able to enable 5G connectivity in cars to improve telematics and to improve entertainment. And Cristiano kind of talked about how there's a big component with infrastructure as well, and how there's going to have to be lots of improvements to the 5G infrastructure to enable a lot of these ADAS applications, in addition to having 5G connectivity in the car, and what that 5G connectivity can do for the car. And he didn't just stop there, because he also talked about how 5G will also help the automotive factory, because there's a lot of applications for 5G in private networking that will help to enable automotive manufacturers to retool their factories and upgrade their equipment without having to worry about Ethernet, and being able to do that at very low latency. So there's a lot of 5G use cases for the automotive industry that are still kind of being tested out. But last week we just spoke about BMW and their partnership with Deutsche Telekom and Vodafone, and enabling eSIM with 5G, and how the eSIM is actually tied to the user and their BMW account rather than the vehicle, which is an interesting use case. But that's also something that came from the show, kind of as one of those pre-announcements. But it's really interesting and important to see that somebody like Qualcomm, who's a big driver of 5G, is very focused on the automotive industry and has their eyes set on connectivity and AI and ADAS to enable better in-car experiences. Because if you look at what the in-car experience was 5 years ago and you compare it to today, they don't feel remotely the same. And because the automotive industry moves a little bit slower than the rest of the tech industry, I expect that we'll see things change drastically over the next 5 years from today.
Yeah, I'll just comment, I continue to be impressed with Qualcomm, as a company. I think they're doing more than many with respect to demonstrating the application and use case for 5G. Obviously, they have a vested interest in that. I'll be attending, and you may be there as well, buddy, because you're in San Diego. I was invited to a Smart Cities 2-day event that Qualcomm is hosting in San Diego, I'm assuming at their corporate headquarters. And so again, I just, I continue to be impressed with how they're pushing the ecosystem. And, it's really not just about, they're selling their Snapdragon solutions. It's really about, sort of enabling, all these verticals and all these industries. So, I mean, Diana, do you have any final thoughts before we close out?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that this kind of plays into Qualcomm's diversification strategy that they outlined. I think it was a couple years ago at CES, I want to say, back when CES was a thing that happened in person. I distinctly remember them pointing to automotive as one of the key verticals that they were going to chase, and it's good to see them follow through, and I'll be interested to see what comes of it.
Awesome.
Yeah,
All right, take us home. Take us home, Anshel.
absolutely. We hope our viewers and listeners this week found this week's topics interesting. If anyone out there would like to provide insight on a specific 5G topic for a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Diana's at Dia Marie's Beat, Will is at Whaletown Tech, and I'm at Anshel Sog. We hope you have a great weekend, and please tune in again next week.